everyone. Welcome to an App Engine Hangout. So this week we have with us Robert, who is an App Engine test engineer, a software engineer and test. And this is really a great opportunity to, he's going to talk about some of the test beds and test runners that he uses and that you can use as well. And he's going to talk a little bit about what he does too. So this is a really great window into the job of one of the people who helps App Engine work as great as it does. And so I just want to do a little plug before we switch to the studio for what's coming up next week. We're going to have a chat with one of our big App Engine customers, and we'll announce a little bit more about that a little bit later in the week. Okay. And I want to apologize. We'd said earlier that we could invite some people who might be interested in joining the Hangout just to chat with us, but we had some technical issues. Sorry, we got started a little late. And so we're unfortunately not able to do that this time. We really wanted to, and we hope to be able to do it in future Hangouts.
Yep.
Okay, so let's switch to the studio where we have Robert and Danny. And what I'd like to do is just to get started, just ask Robert a few questions about what he does, just because I think it'd be of interest to everyone watching.
Hopefully, don't catch him off guard, huh?
Yeah. No, this is not a big grilling, but I think everyone would be interested. Before we start with what you actually have planned to demo, just tell us a little bit about what you do, sort of in your day-to-day work, and maybe a little bit about how you got started with it too, if you think people would like to hear that.
Okay. So I joined Google and App Engine 3.5 years ago, and as an SET, so software engineering test, and my job is basically to write software that helps with testing. And for that, there are three major user groups. For one, App Engine developers, so people who write App Engine, to help them make sure App Engine doesn't break when we push a new release, for example. Then there are external developers, like everyone who's watching, who write applications that run on App Engine. And we want to provide tools so that when you write your application, you can test them easily. And the third group are internal developers, there's Googlers who write App Engine applications, and they also want to make sure that the applications they write are testable. And because Google has some special infrastructure, I also work on making this infrastructure usable for tests for App Engine.
So are you a polyglot in your day-to-day life? Are you targeting every runtime, or is it just one specific runtime?
Mostly Python.
Mostly Python, okay.
Sorry.
I knew today we were mostly talking about Python, but I wasn't sure in your day job in test, if you're targeting all the runtimes or if you have specialists for each individual.
So we split up. We have other software engineering tests, and
sure.
Another colleague, Dave, his name, he writes on Java. It works on Java.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Back to Amy. You have some more questions, I'm sure.
Well, I didn't want to subject Robert to a big grilling, so actually, let's just start with what he had planned to demo, and just for everyone watching, if we have a little bit of time at the end, we'll go to the moderator queue. So we hope to answer just a few of your general questions, and if we have a bit of extra time at the end, we can also sort of make this a bit of a general office hours as well.
Great.
Okay.
So what I want to walk through today are three test tools we use and also have available for external developers. And one of them is for unit testing. Then I want to talk about handler testing, which was also a question from the page, the moderator page.
Yeah.
Yes. And and then I want to talk about end-to-end testing, which was also a question, how can you test your whole stack?
Sure.
And finally, if we have time, talk about library testing. If you write libraries for App Engine, how can you test that?
Right.
So just go ahead and do it?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see the screen? Is it big enough?
You probably want to pump the size up by 1 or 2. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it might be font a bit bigger.
Okay. So
maybe a couple more.
well, it's going to be.
It will be, but it's more than 80 characters. right?
Yeah, let's see.
You can reset your PS1 to something shorter. Export PS1 equals.
I'm going to leave it now, otherwise I mess up my bash, and then maybe not even.
It's just PS1. You could just close it and restart bash. PS1 equals, and
PS1.
you don't need the $sign.
Oh.
Well, you don't want that.
So what do I want?
PS1 equals, say, demo, and then $sign, and then a space.
Okay, this one died.
Yeah.
Export PS1 equals like this.
Well, put it in quotes and put a space after it. A space, yeah, like that. That should be fine. Here you go.
Okay.
A lot more space, right?
Now I'm getting lost in my directories, but let's see. Okay, so what I want to
Whatever. Yeah.
3 things. The first thing, I think I can increase that too, is testbed. Testbed is a library we have for unit testing and Python in particular.
Mm-hmm.
There's also an equivalent for Java that helps you test your Java applications on the unit test level. And unit testing is important because software, if it's not trivial, it's made up of lots of pieces, and you want to test those individual pieces because if you can identify the piece, the particular piece that failed, it's easier for you to debug it and
right.
fix it. So unit testing. And for Python, it's called testbed. For Java, I don't even know if it has an explicit name, but you can always just do a Google search or whatever your favorite search engine.
There we go.
Search engine is App Engine, and then local unit test, and that will either bring you to the Python or to the Java side. And I'm going to talk about Python today, and all the information I'm going to talk about you will also find on this page.
Great.
So let's see. For Python, now since I don't see the path, I'm
PWD will tell you the path if you want it.
Okay. Testbed. So I just set up a demo here, and I will use a run script to run the tests.
Okay.
And the run script is also available on the page I just showed.
Great.
So you can just download it and use it. And
what are you going to be testing? Just the basic Hello World app or something else?
No, we just going to test the units of an app. So we're not going to test an actual app, but only pieces. And for App Engine, when you write an application, you will use services of App Engine. You will use data store, Memcache, blob store, things like that.
Right.
And often for unit tests, you want to mock that.
Right.
Or
using
you want
stubs or some other local mock.
Right. And for App Engine, we now have this test library that provides those stubs.
So the test runner, are you going to talk about the app that you're running it on, or are you just going to run it and talk about
this
how
is
how
just going to run in the shell, and I'm going to show you the tests we have, and then how to run it, and then what the dependencies are and how it works.
Cool.
Okay. So as I mentioned, we have the test script, which is just this one. Well. Let me set up the path. Python path equals app, and hope it works. Yes. The test runner, what it does, it uses unitest2, which is a Python library, which is similar to unitest, which is in the standard library, but it has extra features like finding tests in the directory. So what you can do is you say, give me all the tests in this directory, and then we'll just go through the directory and find all the tests.
Sure.
So that's why I use unitest2.
Yep.
And as you can see here, it expects 2 input values, the SDK path, so the SDK, the Python App Engine SDK we want to use, and then like the root of the test directory.
Which is probably just current directory here.
Which is, yeah. And as I mentioned, we have a couple of dependencies, which for this case are unitest2, I already mentioned that, and then web test. I'm going to talk about web test later, but it's important if you want to test handlers. Handlers are the pieces that actually render the website and serve it to the user.
Sure.
So this is also something you want to make sure it actually works with the test.
Okay.
So those are the 2 dependencies we have, and then we have tests in the test directory. Here we have 3 tests: data store, logs, and handlers, so modules for 3 types of tests. And as an example, I'm just going to look into the data store
Emacs, man after my own heart.
There's a
You do.
Small fight
All
about
three
it.
of us, Emacs users, wonderful.
Okay, so what we're going to do, first we import unit tests. We say, hey, we want to use the unit test model because we want unit tests. Then we import the modules. We're going to use the App Engine services, in this case, Memcache, database, DB, and then testbed, which allows us to use the stubs. And testbed comes from the X package. In this particular case, we have a test model, which is just a simple model that has an integer property, text property, to hold some data. And we also have a function here that's called getEntity via Memcache, that if you retrieve an entity through that function, it will first look it up in Memcache. If it's not there.
So in other words, what NDB does by default.
Yes. Now that we have NDB.
Yes.
You should use NDB, but that's a good example for
Yeah,
this.
definitely. Except there's one level of caching not even included there, which is the instance level cache.
Yes, yes.
But that's a conversation for another day. That's what we're testing here.
But NDB is a nice library. Guido at his best.
Yes.
So what do? We write a unit test. The usual unit test or test case is as a base class. And then we set up our test. So default thing is you say, hey, set up. This is what is done before every single test you do. And the counterpart for this is teardown, which is done after every single test you execute.
So I noticed you have in your setup a init data store v3 stub. Can you talk a little bit about what that v3 is doing and how people can sort of know what stubs and what stub names correspond to the services they're going to use?
Yeah.
If you're going to talk about this later, by all means, hold off till then.
Yeah, I'm just going to we're 2 steps away from that.
Oh, okay. Go. We'll wait till
problem.
then. We'll wait 2 steps. My bad.
So at first we instantiate a testbed object, which is an object that will create the stubs for you and then mock out certain capabilities so you can use them for testing. Once you've done that, you say, hey, activate the testbed for me. This is kind of the step where you say, whatever has been there before, save it. So when we deactivate it later on, you can restore it.
Okay.
And then we say init stub. And we have different services. Each service has a name. And then it's kind of like init service name stub. So init memcache stub is obvious. Then there's image task stub, image maze stub, and then data store v3 stub, which is not that obvious. Why is it v3, right?
Right.
So
and was there a v2, etc.?
Yeah. It's just an iteration of the data store versions we had, and this is v3. I'm sure at some point there will be a v4, but because we don't want to have you deal with regressions when we switch to a new data store, we rather be explicit.
Okay.
Better be explicit than implicit.
So I actually know a bit of the history behind the naming there. I was just, for the viewers' sake. But the question more that I had to ask was, how would we know that, from google.appengine.api import DB would correspond to a stub that's data store? Is there any explicit way to do this, or is it sort of just kind of knowing what's there? Or
2 things you can do. You either look it up on the website, which just says you, hey, here are all the supported stubs.
Great.
Or if you just say, whatever, I don't care, init all stubs.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So that's.
But that'll make the test a little slower and
you
certainly
set up
less
there.
explicit, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can do both. Okay, restored. Now, the first test is really straightforward. We just create an entity, put it into data store, and then try to retrieve 2 entities.
Okay.
But the test says, hey, check that's only 1 entity.
Right.
And now that we use testbed and activate it before every test run, tear it down after every test run, we will work on an empty data store.
Right.
So this test will actually pass because no matter how many times you run it, you tear down the data store, create a new one.
Right.
So that's what it does. The next test is really just checking, hey, create a key, delete the entity, see if when I retrieve that key, I don't get anything returned, actually.
Okay.
And this also already uses the getEntity via memcache function, which just looks into data store, and if it finds it, then I'm just going to skip here. This one, entity, then retrieves the entity via memcache, and we want to check that's actually the entity returned we have created.
Sure.
So it's just, again, testing the path through that function.
Sorry, I don't want to hijack this.
No, go ahead.
So I noticed one thing which made me think. we have two runtimes supported in Python, 2.5 and 2.7, right? And unit test actually changed between, well, it changes every version of Python, but there was initially assert equal, assert not equal, assert true, assert false. And that was about it. But in 2.7, there were like 6 more asserts added, one of which is assert none. Now I see here you're doing an assert equal again with a none. So is this written with both runtimes in mind, or are there separate separate test cases or separate ways you're going to write it for the different runtimes?
So that's really up to the app developer. If he says my app will only run in Python 2.7 because it's the future and Python 2.5 is going to be go away at some point, you can use your tests, the test functionality that is available in Python 2.7. So like assert none and all those extra fancy features.
But testbed itself, it will run.
It's agnostic.
Okay, great.
It really just uses. It's really just
standard
a utility.
Stuff.
It doesn't depend on unit tests. It will just provide additional tools for your unit tests you write.
Like making these stubs.
Cool.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Also, Python 2.7 actually includes unit test 2, which I explicitly included here as
part of the standard library.
Yes.
Okay. Great.
And then the last one, the last function I'm testing here, or the last piece of functionality, I create an entity, then get the entity key, delete that entity, and see if I use get entity via memcache, it's still available.
Sure.
Because get entity via memcache is not aware of data store deletes, but it cached it, it will find it in cache and then return it.
One of the 2 hardest problems in computer science, right? Cache validation.
So this is a simple example. Don't use that in your application.
Please.
Don't.
pretty please.
Yeah. So and this is what's done. Now if we're here. If we run, use the run script and point it to the SDK, because that's one of the parameters, and point it into the test directory, it will go through all the tests, execute them, and then this is
all good.
What we see here.
Great.
Okay. So.
Another side question. Are you on the newest 1.7.3 or are you using 1.7.2?
That's actually 1.7.2.
Oh, come on. If people didn't see, 1.7.3 was just released yesterday. So if you haven't upgraded yet, go ahead and do it. But apparently we can't even get our own test engineers to do it.
Well, actually, I work already with 1.7.4, but I didn't want to use it on my machine, so better be safe than sorry.
Sure.
So, Robert,
yes.
Just for fun, why don't you edit one of those tests to have the insertion break and show what it looks like if that's the case.
Test data store. So we can just introduce the simple def test fail.
Contrasting styles there.
What do we want? False. Okay, so we now have a test that just
there we go.
Will fail. And here's what you get. So it's just failing tests.
Great.
And one thing we don't provide is, for this particular case, integration into a tool like Eclipse or PyDev for Eclipse, because often people have different sets of tools, and just to support all of them is really hard. So we just give you the basics, and then you can hook it up.
As far as what we're talking about today, the Python community isn't necessarily married to one or a few set of tool chains. You know, there's
nose test, for example.
Right. Yeah. So we sort of live in harmony in that way.
Yeah. Another thing I want to talk about, and there was also a question: how can you test Web App 2? Web App 2 is a library again that runs on App Engine and helps you to render HTTP response
and create WSGI handlers and things.
Yes. So let's have a look at this. What we have, let's see, Emacs tests. We have a simple handler here that uses Web App 2 and does nothing other than writing hello world and setting the content type.
Yep.
So it's really simple. If you run that in your app,
it's the Python 2.7 hello world.
Hello world. And what you also see here, we use testbed because we want to test it. And well, that's actually too too early. Ignore that.
Okay.
This is the test part.
Right.
We're going to use a web test. And the test itself, again, is just a try class of test case. And then in the setup, we first create the app, the Whiskey app we're going to test, which is the handler we have, and then some path where it works. And then we use WebTest2. WebTest2 is a great library for testing web applications for Python. And it really makes sense to use that in the App Engine context as well.
Okay.
It's really
and
cool.
is this a best practice for our Python developers for their local testing, or is just something that we are big fans of?
You mean using WebTest?
WebTest, yeah.
We're a big fan of it.
Okay.
We don't...
We're not going to make you use it,
Yes,
but
yes.
yeah. Okay.
It makes it really easy.
So, is there some reason the import of WebTest happened after the definition of the class? Or
Oh, this is really just so it's
just thrown together.
Focus.
Gotcha. Okay, great.
Yeah. So you know what.
So it's
what
not that
belongs
it's just
together.
thrown together. It's important that you draw your eye to
It was intentional.
Got it. That's why you broke PEP 8, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't run Pilot here. So what we do now?
We don't run Pilot here. All right.
On this demo code, we do it at Google.
Yes.
Okay. So now that we have
lynch your code, everyone.
yes. Now we have the app, we're going to wrap it in a test app that is provided by WebTest.
Okay.
So we say WebTest.test app, please wrap this app. And this test wrapper allows us to easily make requests like get, post, whatever we want.
Okay.
So in this example, we say test app.get, which is making a get request to the app, and will give us a response. The response object is also a web test helper object, and this one allows us to easily query the status code, the body, or the content type, for example.
Okay.
So the three things we want to check for our very simple handler. And yeah, that's basically it. So if we can also, for example, just copy this and we'll make this a post request.
Sure.
And then just say, hey, instead of get, do a post.
Sure.
So it works the same way.
Or we could set a header and check that also.
You can do whatever you want.
Sure.
Yeah. And something you often do on App Engine is use App Engine services. Right? You use Memcache, for example, when you want to retrieve your stuff faster. So how do we merge the two test things here, the web test and handler service testing? So the testbed thing we talked about earlier. Well, again, a simple handler that will just, on a post request, parse the key and the value from the URL parameters and put them into Memcache. So nothing big here. And the test now uses testbed again, what we had before, and before we also use Memcache. And we just do the same thing we saw before. We create an app and a test app wrapper, then we instantiate testbed and initialize the Memcache stuff.
Okay.
And for teardown, we're just gonna deactivate everything.
Right.
So what we do now in the test, we say this is the key and this is the value, random
42
values,
is the answer.
and we're gonna pass this to the handler, and then the test itself checks, hey, if I query Memcache now, is the key set and does it return the value I set
Right.
it? So straightforward.
So first we saw services only, then we saw web test only, now we see both of them used at the same time,
Right.
which is probably what most of your web apps are going to look like.
Yes, most web apps don't use some App Engine service.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, and that's pretty much testbed, what testbed allows you to do.
Cool.
So it allows you to write unit tests. And unit tests really, the greatest benefit is that they run fast, or that they should run fast. So you can run them whenever you save or whenever you commit code, and you get instant feedback. And which is a good segue into the second type of test, end-to-end tests, which are large tests. They test the whole stack from top to bottom, and because of that, they're really slow. And they take a while to set up, and then also a while to execute. But it's still important to do end-to-end tests, because while you may trust your units, you don't know whether the whole setup will work, whether the whole configuration and wiring you have done actually is correct.
Sure.
A part of App Engine, yes?
Sorry to derail you there. I thought before we moved on from testbed, one thing that might be of interest to a lot of people, because I see a lot of questions about this, is testing with HRD when you have issues of eventual consistency.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to say a few words of advice about that?
Is there like a particular issue I should talk about? So one thing I can mention, but I think you know, on the
people might know there's a setting to
yes.
indicate.
Yes.
Yes.
So if you go to the website, it will describe you exactly what you need to do. So here you say, hey, we're going to use the pseudo-random HRD consistency policy, and if you enable that in your tests will actually work with HRD similar behavior. So that is not consistent right away.
Right.
It's just kind of you have some certain random element in there.
It simulates the network latency effectively.
Yeah.
And you can turn that on for some tests and turn it off for others.
Yes.
Also, people who are testing their apps just by running them and playing around with them by clicking, keep in mind, Dev App Server by default, right now, is still master slave.
Yes.
So you're going to have to pass in a flag to actually make it be HRD when you're just running your development server. And that's also something that people don't always know, don't always realize.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Then I'm going to go back to the end-to-end test and hope I find the right directory. Yes. So end-to-end tests. As I mentioned, you want to test the whole stack. And to test the whole stack, you need to run your application in some way. An example is you have app.yaml configured and say this handler should work on this path, and this path should be treated by this handler. And this is something you cannot test in a unit test, right? You want to check that your app.yaml configuration actually is working.
Right.
So for this, you have to run your application. So one thing you can do is start your application with DevOps Server and then start clicking. Right?
Sure.
And then, hey, is it working? Is it working? Which is...
It's hard to automate your finger.
It's tedious, right? You can have one of those I don't know what they call, sipping birds, right? But
you could also use something like Selenium.
You could use something like Selenium WebDriver, but you still need something that starts up your app. Right. So, and in order to automate that, there's a library called GE driver, and GE driver basically does exactly that. It takes an application and some other configuration input, and then says, based on that, we'll start your app with DevOps Server, or we'll deploy it to App Engine.
Right.
And this can be done with an API, so it can be part of your test setup.
Wow.
So you say, hey, please deploy this app, and then run the following tests.
Sure.
So, and this is what I'm going to demonstrate now. Let me see. I need to set up the path again. Okay. So let's look at the app at first. The app is just a standard app.yaml main, and it also has a static directory, which just has a static file. Nothing special. And then what we also have in here is the configuration file we're going to use for this test run. And this one includes the app ID. So if you want to deploy, the library needs to know where to put it, right? And it also needs an SDK, so can actually deploy it. It also knows where the application is located. And in this case, cluster hostname is set to localhost, which the library will take as, okay, use DevOps Server to run the test.
Okay.
If you use appspot.com, it will deploy the app to appspot.com.
Okay.
And in that case, you will also need credentials.
And I'm assuming that it's going to parse the port from this and pass it into DevApp Server when it runs it? Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
So let's look at the test module. Here we have, again, some unit test library, and then GAE driver, which library we use, and the config file I just showed, which has the crucial config information. Two things we're going to do here. We will work with an app token, which is something GA driver will give you to shut down your app again. For example, when you started with DevOps Server, it started, but you need some way to tear it down. Otherwise, the process keeps running.
Okay.
So you need to close it appropriately. And then a config object, which is basically the config file parsed and then given to you as an object, so you can use it in
the config file in app. The config file
sorry.
in app.yaml.
The GAE driver config file we just walked through.
Okay.
So the app ID,
Gotcha.
the cluster hostname,
Gotcha.
things like that. Because end-to-end tests are expensive, you only want to do the setup once, or as few times as possible, as necessary. And for this, we use setup class, which is which tells the unit test runner only do that once per test class.
Okay.
So if we have 5 test methods in the class, it will still only do it once.
Okay.
And the same for teardown class. So what do we do here? At first, we retrieve the config object. So we read basically the config file and then have like an object that contains all the information.
This setup class method, this is not part of unit test. This is some extension of unit test.
No, it's actually unit test.
Wow, great.
Yeah.
So what you're doing, you're making a custom test case, and unit test, unit test.test case and unit test.2, unit test2.test case both support this. Having a class method called setup class,
Unit test 2 supports it. Since unit test 2 is part of Python 2.7, you can assume Python supports it.
Right.
Okay, good. So, and the second step in the setup class is just GAE driver setup app. And based on the cluster hostname, which we have set to a local host, it will start the app with DevOps server and then return to the control flow.
Sure.
And that's pretty much all you need to do to set up your application for testing. And then let's look at one of the tests here, test homepage, where you build the URL from the config object. In this case, config.app_hostname will tell you, okay, localhost port 8080. For when you deploy your app, it would be then foo.appspot.com. So you build your URL, then you make a request to it, and you just check the response whether it's what you expected. And if we look at the application, hello world, and this is what we want to see.
Okay.
And the same for dynamic content. Oh, and then, sorry, I forgot to mention that. This test also checks ETag headers. ETag headers are HTTP headers that are set to indicate to a client, cache this content or don't cache it. And if it has an ETag header, it will actually cache it.
Sure.
And for dynamic content, like what is generated with the handler, App Engine will not set an ETag header because dynamic content is generated dynamically, so you don't want anyone to cache it. On the other hand, if you have static content, like whatever you serve.
Static.txt.
Yes. App Engine will set an ETag header for you, and then a browser queries it once, fetches it once, and for the second request, it would just re-show the same file. And here we just check that. We build the URL again, make a request, and check whether the ETag header is in the response. And the same for the static content, where we actually expect it. And let's run it.
All right.
So
now you said it's going to take a long time, yeah?
Well, let's see how long it takes. So this one...
obviously longer than 0.0051 seconds.
Definitely. Longer than the past. But we're done. So it took 5 seconds.
Okay.
5 seconds to start the app with DevOps server, make the requests, and then tear down DevOps server again. For appspot.com, it will take longer because deployments usually take longer. So that's end-to-end testing. And this is something we also use as part of the App Engine development, because one thing we want to test is that all the APIs work on the entire stack.
Sure.
So we have, for example, applications built from tests for Memcache. So we check, okay, if I use Memcache, does it go all the way through to the Memcache backend, come back and have the correct response?
Right.
So this is part of what we use internally, but then open source because it's useful to others as well.
Now, is there some equivalent search term in your favorite search engine for GAE driver,
yes,
like there was for web test?
The search term is basically GAE driver, which will bring you to a Google project code page. And if you want to install it on your machine, you can just do pip install GAE driver
from PyPI,
which will fetch it.
Great.
Okay. And since it's an API, it's easy to integrate that and to continuous test setups you have. Because I saw a question on the
moderator
page
queue about continuous deployments and testing.
Yes. So you could use GE driver for that to say, okay, deploy the app, run your tests, see if it works.
Sure.
Okay. And then that brings me to the last part, which is library testing, where we also want to support our developers who write libraries for App Engine that are then used by other App Engine applications. And
NDB is actually a good case for this, right? Because it started outside and then made it in, but it's still an EXT, so maybe.
But it's a nice development model, I think, because it allows you to get feedback quick from users, right? Which is what you really want. So let's see where we are. So for this, I'm going to use a library called Aeta. Aeta also started out as an internal project, and this summer, then our intern, Jacob Taylor, actually polished it and made it an open source project.
Cool.
So again, you can just search it, Aeta App Engine.
What's the acronym for, or is this something else?
It's App Engine Test Appendix.
Okay, appendix, appendix, got it.
Yep. And the name came from Guido.
Okay, okay.
So I just went with that.
A benevolent name.
Yes. Okay, let's look at this. Again, we have an app here. In this app, app.yaml, main.py, and then it has a test directory, and it includes the Aeta library.
Sure.
So if we look at app.yaml, we see whatever comes to test/ is handled by Aeta.
Okay.
And if we look at the test directory, we see a bunch of tests there: fail tests, file access tests. And now let's start this app. And see what it will look like. So this is the app. The app itself doesn't tell anything, but it knows where the test is. So we point you there. And this is now handled by Aeta. And Aeta will go through the test directory and look for all the tests. So this is a list of all the tests it found. This is the package, this is the test module, and then it found those test classes with those test methods.
Cool.
And then it allows you to run them, and we just basically, run them all.
And are these happening asynchronously via HTTP calls? They're not some sub-process running on App Engine or anything like that?
Oh, this one. So what happens is this front end, the website, talks to the handler from Aeta and say, give me all the tests. And then it responds all the tests.
And then it renders it based on what it receives.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Cool.
So it's kind of Ajax-y.
Yes.
And then we saw
kind of
one test that failed, which is test fail, which is expected because it even says so.
Cool.
Okay. And all you need to do to use Aeta is basically go to, Aeta.googlecode.com, which describes how to use Aeta and all that stuff, and put it in your app directory, set up app.yaml, and then set up a test directory.
It's not yet on PyPI? Ready to be pip installed?
No.
Someday, huh?
Yeah, it will be. And one thing that's also useful for in the context of Aeta, you don't want to, again, go to a website, click on something, pass the test results. Right?
Sure.
It's manual is expensive and just like a drag, basically.
Sure.
So what we're going to do is we're going to start the application or the web server, and then, it's small. We can use a local client, and this local client takes just like a URL test. I think it was this one, and then go to the Aeta handler, and then query all the. Let me just see if that's. Tests. Okay, wrong path. So this won't work. This should work. Goes to the Aeta handler and then queries, hey, give me all the tests, and then we'll run all the tests. And
got it.
Why do we want this in this wrapper? Because we want to test code within an App Engine environment. So we want to test it within either the app server environment, so the production environment, or within the SDK. Also, okay, that failed.
Maybe you need to be super user or something.
Let's see.
That's not a hammer for every nail, by the way. I'm just postulating there.
Oh,
maybe
see, it just said local.
There we go.
So
typo.
A typo. And
that was fast.
So now we know, okay, it passed. And you can put this together with GAE driver to start your app automatically, and then use Aeta, the local client, to run the tests.
So you're running it from the main directory of this application.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where does local client come from? It comes distributed with Aeta?
Yeah, it comes with Aeta. So it's a local standalone client.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a reason it's at the root of the directory rather than?
Oh no, actually it's not the root of the directory. It's just random.
Oh, okay.
We're actually outside of the directory.
I see. Okay, I got you. So you just put it there for so it was below the application, so you can actually hit the application, or what?
So the application, the local client has nothing to do with the application or with it.
I realize this. I'm just curious about why we didn't just go into the Aeta directory in the application to run local client.
Probably what
semantics,
you will,
folks, really irrelevant. But
what you will do at some point is, what our test setup also looks like is we have a bunch of unit tests. We put them in an app wrapper, then deploy those apps with an automated script based on GAE driver, run the tests with the local client,
right,
and then integrate the feedback into our test framework.
Right.
So, so it's really totally separate from the app. And one thing we also do is we test it with different environments. So we use it to test against Python 2.5 environment, Python 2.7, different DevOps server setups.
Sure.
So this is basically what we use out of.
Cool.
Yeah. And that's those are the three things I wanted to talk about.
Super helpful demos, right? If nothing else, just seeing them all together and seeing the quick mocks you can make, it's pretty big. As you could tell with some of my questions, Robert's test foo is completely superior to my test foo, even though I consider myself to be something of a Python nut. But these things are actually pretty important if you have a production application and you're running a business off it, which
definitely,
hopefully plenty of people watching are.
Yeah.
So Amy, what next? What else are we gonna do?
So thanks so much, Robert. That was great. And if you're like me and sort of put off writing your tests until the end of your app building, maybe this will inspire you because you can see how easy it is and how great some of this stuff is. So I think we've got a few more questions coming in on the moderator that are test related. So I want to apologize in advance to the few questions that are not test related, which I think we might need to get to next time. We'll propagate them along.
Sure.
Let's see. So we've covered the one about Web App 2. And you sort of covered this one, but I'll let you answer it further if you want to. For functional tests, is there any recommended setup? BDD, Selenium, any built-in feature in App Engine for this?
There's no built-in feature in App Engine because, like the web test library we use to do handler testing, they're really great open source projects to do functional testing. So drive your website, for example. Right. My personal preference is WebDriver. It has a great API, and it allows you to use different types of browsers as well. And if you use, for example, a GAE driver, you can start your app or deploy it, and then integrate that with a WebDriver test that hits certain URLs, certain elements on the page, and then checks the output.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a tough question. We certainly want to help people with this, but a lot of the things we're providing are server side, and when you're talking about testing, JavaScript and user interfaces and things like that, it starts to leave the scope. I guess if you're talking about things like the channel API, it's sort of always within our scope and things like that. But it's sort of hard to try to cover all of this. But like he said, it's something that we're aware of and we certainly use.
Yeah. So there are really great resources, but because it's much bigger than App Engine. It's really web testing, right? Web application testing, which you can write on Tomcat or on whatever you want, right? We don't cover it in particular.
Sorry.
Okay, here's another one. Again, you've touched on it a bit. How do you set up your test environments, especially CI, with the packaging format that App Engine is delivered in?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. What's CI?
So continuous integration.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we do as part of App Engine is also we have applications that are checked in, and then we use, for example, a GAE driver to, whenever there's a change, run them, for example, with the SDK, run all the tests, like WebDriver-based tests, and then see whether they still pass. And the same you should be doing probably both for the SDK, but also before you deploy, because the SDK tries to be as close as possible to the production environment,
Right.
but it's not
Sure.
quite there.
It's not equivalent.
It's not equivalent, but close. So it really makes sense, and we do the same to test our applications both on the SDK and in the production environment by using tools like GAE driver to deploy them automatically with an API, and by using tools like WebDriver to do the functional testing.
Cool.
And since it's possible, since those have APIs, it's easy to write scripts that do that for you, so you can automate it.
Right. Also, I guess the second part of this question asks about the packaging. But as we saw with things like GAE driver, you can actually deal with that.
Yeah.
In your config file. So it's it's something that, as long as you're putting it in the same place, or as long as you know where you put it, you'll be able to set that in your config. Next question. Anything else?
That is actually the last testing related question.
Okay.
Although I'll briefly address one that's easy to address. Are there plans for a Dart runtime environment? So this, I'm afraid, is our stock answer, that we can't comment on things that aren't on the roadmap. Sorry about that.
I can answer more questions.
And there's another good.
If you want.
Well, it's been sitting there for a while, and there's also a good question about Eclipse. That what we hope to. We've been having sort of Python heavy hangouts recently, and so we hope to have some in the future that focus more on Java. So I think we'll propagate that discussion question to an upcoming hangout, since we're running a bit short of time.
Yes.
Robert, would it be, if people were interested in getting this code just to play around with it, would it be easy to make it available to people? I mean, if you were, would it be easy to give it to me and I could work on making it available?
We can do that. Also, GAE driver and Aeta both have demo apps that come with them.
Okay.
So once you download those libraries, you can just work with them.
Okay, that's probably sufficient.
Are there wikis on these projects? If not, then I'll be happy to write it up.
Again, go to the Aeta project page and the GAE driver page. They also have stuff.
And they got wikis.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So
great.
Okay, great. Thanks
so much. Go forth and
test.
test.
Really wonderful. All right. See everyone next time. We'll have another one next week, another hangout. So watch for the announcement on that.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.